Okay. See that many folks have joined here. Welcome. For those of you that are here, you found your way to the Planning and Environmental Linkages Study public meeting. We'll begin the meeting in a couple minutes, so hang tight. And right at 5:30, I'll kick things off. All right. We'll get started in a few minutes. Stay tuned, and we'll start sharp at 5:30. Okay, let's go ahead and start things off. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the State Route 37 Corridor Ultimate Project Planning and Environmental Linkages Study public meeting. My name is Christopher Caputo, one of the Caltrans co-leads for the State Route 37 Planning and Environmental Linkages, or PEL, study. This meeting is being held to provide an update on the status of the development of the State Route 37 PEL study and the alternatives that we have examined for the study. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items. First, I want to let you know that we are recording tonight's meeting, and we are also having the meeting translated. And on the next slide, I will share information about the language channels. We're translating tonight's meeting into Spanish and Tagalog, and in just a moment, we will open those channels. But first, I will walk through how to get into the Spanish and Tagalog channels, and then I will turn things over to our translators to share that information in Spanish and Tagalog. If you would like to listen to the presentation in either of these languages, click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select Spanish or Tagalog. To listen to any translated comments we received tonight from Spanish or Tagalog speaking participants, please join the English channel. Joining us tonight to provide Spanish translation are Carmen and Ana. They will now give instructions on how to join the Spanish channel.
Buenas tardes, yo soy Ana, estoy aquí con mi compañera Carmen y nosotras dos vamos a ayudarles el día de hoy con la interpretación de inglés a español. Si ustedes quieren oír la presentación en español, por favor hagan un clic en el botón de interpretación en la parte de abajo de la pantalla y seleccione la opción de español. También por favor asegúrese de ponerle mute en el audio original, con eso solo puede oír la presentación en español. Gracias.
Thank you both. Our Tagalog translators are Rosemary and Rosalani. I will ask them to provide instructions on how to join the Tagalog channel. Sounds like they are either on mute or possibly having some other audio difficulty.
Chris, I believe they've moved into the Tagalog channel already. So that channel is open for any of our participants wanting to listen in Tagalog tonight.
Great. Okay, so both channels should be open now. And we'll be posting tonight's presentation to our project website. A link to the website is in the chat box. Click on the chat icon on the bottom of your screen to open the chat box and view the link to the website. In addition to recording this meeting, we're also having it transcribed. If you'd like to turn captions on or off, click the live transcript icon on the bottom of your screen and choose the enable option. My final housekeeping item is regarding use of the chat feature to ask questions. We encourage you to ask questions and provide comments tonight using the chat feature, and we will respond to them after the presentation. Please note that questions and comments are not visible to all attendees, but we will track and address all substantive questions and comments once we have completed our presentation. To ask a question using the chat feature, click on the chat icon on the bottom of your screen. A box will open and you can type your question there. If you're participating in the meeting by phone only, we will take verbal questions after we respond to questions and comments that have been submitted in the chat box. Okay, that does it for housekeeping. Now let me introduce our presenters and panelists. As I mentioned, I'm Chris Caputo. Joining me tonight to present information on the PEL study is my Caltrans colleague, Tammy Massengale. Also presenting information and answering questions are Ricky Gao from Caltrans, Jeff Berna and Matt Chambly with Jacobs, and John Cook with ICF. Let me now quickly explain what we will be discussing tonight. Following my remarks, we will give a presentation which is approximately 30 minutes long. The presentation will start with information about work that has been completed to inform the development of the State Route 37 PEL study this year. We will review the process we have gone through to review, screen, and evaluate alternatives for the PEL study. We will also share the preferred alternative. We welcome your comments and questions about the preferred alternative. Please add them to the chat box as we conduct this presentation. After our presentation, we will respond to questions or comments you have left in the chat, and then we will respond to verbal questions or comments. I'll now go ahead and turn the presentation over to my colleague, Tammy Massengale. Thank you.
Great. Next slide, please. Thank you, Chris. Good evening. I'm Tammy Massengale. I work for Caltrans and am co-leading the PEL study with Chris. We're preparing the PEL study for State Route 37 to combine work efforts that take place at Caltrans for both transportation planning and environmental analysis. The PEL initiative is a voluntary, flexible, and collaborative planning process that is undertaken by transportation agencies. As we've shared at previous meetings, and as you know, State Route 37 is a 21-mile roadway connecting US 101 in the west to Interstate 80 in the east. It is a vital link in the region's economy. It connects the 4 North Bay counties, Marin, Sonoma, Napa, and Solano. It is heavily traveled and prone to congestion. It goes through highly sensitive marshland, commonly referred to as the San Pablo Baylands. Given its location, it is vulnerable to flood-related closures and sea level rise. Studies predict the corridor could be permanently submerged. This could result in additional traffic and travel pattern concerns. Caltrans has undertaken the PEL study to address future transportation issues on State Route 37 and identify an ultimate solution for the challenges facing this corridor. Next slide, please. The PEL study that we're working on for State Route 37 is the first PEL study that's been conducted on the state highway system in California. Some benefits of conducting a study like this are allowing us to look at the big picture by examining a broad area or corridor and analyzing transportation, environmental, community, and economic goals early in the planning process. Establishing a long-term transportation vision and setting the stage for focused future projects. Gathering preliminary data and considering a conceptual level of design, traffic analyses, and an evaluation of environmental impacts. Soliciting input and, if possible, support from the public, tribes, elected officials, resource agencies, and other stakeholders regarding agency transportation decisions. Establishing buy-in from agencies and stakeholders on a corridor vision, purpose and need, range of alternatives, and consideration of key environmental issues. And lastly, encouraging working relationships and early agency involvement, which enables more effective decision-making. One of the primary reasons Caltrans is conducting the PEL study is to address sea level rise and to look for solutions. The various alignments and alternatives we have evaluated for future improvements to the corridor all consider sea level rise. For context, we're showing 2 aerial photos of the North Bay. These photos are from the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission's Bay Shoreline Flood Explorer. The photo on the left shows existing conditions today, while the photo on the right shows what sea level rise inundation could look like in 21-23. The dark blue ranges from 8 to 12 feet of inundation or more of sea level rise. The medium blue ranges from 4 to 8 feet of sea level rise, and the lightest blue ranges from 0 to 2 feet of sea level rise. Next slide, please. We've prepared several 360-degree visualizations that show various scenarios and conceptual solutions for State Route 37. The view that we'll show tonight is of the western portion of the corridor near Highway 101. These visualizations allow you to scroll and view the corridor with focus on several scenarios. So the first one was the 0 feet of sea level rise. And now here you're seeing sea level rise in the year 2050 with about 2 feet of inundation. Next is 7 feet of inundation in the year 2100. And lastly, 9 feet of inundation in year 2123. We will show a short flyover of a conceptual solution for State Route 37. This starts at Highway 101 at Novato Creek, which shows existing conditions, and then the projected 7 feet of sea level rise at the year 2100. So you can slowly see here the inundation at year 2100. Great, thank you. We have worked with many local, state, and federal agencies, organizations, and interested parties to evaluate the alternatives that were identified and carried forward in the PEL study. We established environmental, design, and traffic technical working groups that reviewed and gave input on the screening criteria for each level of evaluation conducted, and then analyzed the criteria. We shared the results and outcomes of the technical working group feedback with a stakeholder working group and solicited their input on alignments, modes, design, and feasibility. As you can see from this list, we have a large group of participants who have contributed to the evaluations conducted for this study. And I would just like to give them a quick shout out and appreciation for all of their input. Next slide, please. I'll turn our presentation over to John Cook, a member of our PEL study team, who will now share details about the work we have done to evaluate potential alignments, modes, and other considerations. John?
Thanks so much, Tammy, and thank you for moving to the next slide. I'd like to start by talking about the evaluation criteria and screening work that the PEL study team has been doing over the past several months. One way to think about the PEL process is that it's an effort to find the best possible way to address an issue at hand. And for this PEL, the key issue at hand is imminent sea level rise, as you just saw in the video simulations that threaten the long-term viability of State Route 37 in its current location. As we'll show in a moment, there have been a number of potential alternative alignments that Caltrans has examined that to address that issue. Through the PEL process, Caltrans used evaluation criteria to help screen a pretty wide range of alternatives, and I'll walk us through those alternatives in a moment. As shown in this illustration, and the text starting from the left, we used 3 different levels of criteria. The level 1 criteria measured how well the project, the alignment or alternative met the project purpose and need. And purpose and need is our way in the environmental planning transportation world of saying why a project is needed. And we'll show that purpose and need statement in its entirety in just a moment. Level 2 criteria, after that first screening, measured how well the alternative or met other key objectives such as cost, feasibility, environmental, ecological factors, and others. And level 3 then in turn looked at the alternatives against a wide range of environmental and transportation related factors and compared how well each performed. As shown in the graphic, this is really a funneling process to carry forward the best performing alternatives, set aside those that are problematic in any way, so that the environmental review process that's required by federal and state law can be really focused, efficient, and clear. Next slide, please. One other virtue of the PEL process is, besides helping screen and limit the number of alternatives that are considered, is that it generates a lot of information that can in turn be folded into that formal environmental review process and help expedite that. This slide is just an excerpt from federal law, a reminder that the federal law that set up this PEL process anticipates that during a PEL, you're going to create a lot of information that could be valuable. And we to the extent possible, Caltrans certainly anticipates making all this information available to the environmental review process and making it more efficient by using this PEL information developed over the last several months. Next slide, please. So for the level 1 evaluation, again, this was focused on the project purpose and need. Caltrans worked with a very large number of stakeholders that Tammy mentioned earlier to help develop this purpose and need statement, the 5 bullet points going down here. So it does bear taking a moment just to go through these. First and foremost, preserving a critical regional transportation corridor, State Route 37, that's resilient to extreme events such as sea level rise, while integrating ecological resiliency, which facilitates adaptation to sea level rise. Providing reliable travel time and increasing average vehicle occupancy, providing safe mobility for bicyclists and pedestrians, maintaining and maintaining and enhancing public access, including to recreational areas, and providing equitable transit and multimodal transportation solutions that will improve access for, provide meaningful benefits to all users of State Route 37, special consideration of underserved communities. So through the level 1, we made these into criteria that helped us address our first wave of alignments, which again we'll show in the very next slides here. So if we could go to that next slide. This is where we started. We started with 9 preliminary alignments, part of the level 1 screening. These alignments were adapted from a number of prior studies conducted throughout the corridor over the last several years by Caltrans and by other regional transportation agencies. So they formed a really good starting point for us in this PEL study to look at, and as you'll see, we did add some as the process went along. So I'm going to go through each one of these one by one over the next several slides, just to orient everyone to these alignments. So alignment 1 started at US 101 in Novato and followed the existing State Route 37 corridor east towards Highway 121 at Sears Point, continued north on existing 121 just past the raceway, and then took a turn to the east over what would be a new roadway. This roadway roughly parallels some existing railroad tracks in the area that do connect over in the Highway 29 area and continue on towards Sassoon. But eventually, this new alignment would meet Highway 29 north of American Canyon, and people wishing to get to Interstate 80 could go either via Highway 12 in Cordelia or go south towards through American Canyon and connect in Vallejo. So that's alignment 1. Alignment 2, please. Next slide. Okay, so alignment 2 would have started again from the west. This would create a new interchange on 101 just south of north of Novato, in between Novato and Petaluma, It would go cross-country across marshland, including a bridge across the Petaluma River, as you can see, and then cross Lakeville Highway, and eventually make its way towards Highway 121 and use that existing alignment for a few minutes. And then again, take that turn to the east following the same alignment as alignment 1, following the railroad tracks towards American Canyon and I-80. Next slide, please. Alignment 3 is similar. Again, it would create a whole new interchange on 101 near where the San Antonio interchange used to be. That dashed line coming off 101 at the green line is the Marin-Sonoma County line, where the San Antonio Creek is the dividing line between the counties. So this would be a brand new roadway again across that land, across the Petaluma River, and then making its way to 121, and then again following generally the same alignment between 121 and 29 that parallels the existing railroad tracks. Next slide, please. So alignment 4 is a little bit different. This would start all the way up in Petaluma along Highway 116, Lakeville Highway. It would go to the east towards Stage Gulch Road, and again go cross country between Lakeville Highway and 121, and would then reach 121 and go again on that same alignment as 1, 2, and 3. Along the marshlands following the existing railroad tracks towards American Canyon and I-80. Next slide, please. Okay, so alignment 5 is more or less following the existing Highway 37 corridor. We have alignment 5 and 6, as we'll show in a moment, that look pretty much the same if you actually want to go to the next slide and talk about them together here. So alignment 5 and 6 more or less assume the same corridor would be used, the same existing right-of-way. When we started the process, we assumed one of these would be raised in some way, either via a causeway or embankment, and that the other would be kept at the level, its current level, but protected by levees. So that's alignment 5 and 6, more or less both in the same corridor. Okay, next slide, please. And then we have alignment 7, which is an interesting option here. So it has 2 components. From Novato on the west, it would create a new bay crossing going from Novato just north of Belmarin Keys on a new raised bridge, crossing the bay all the way over to Mare Island. But it would also have a connection of southerly extension of Highway 121 from Sears Point south to this new bay crossing that was considered. And that's alignment 7. As we're seeing some comments in the chat. You'll see that a lot of these were screened out. So please stay tuned, and you'll see some results soon. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So alignment 8 was intended to stay fully outside the area where sea level rise is expected. Tammy showed that slide earlier where inundation was expected. Alignment 8 would use existing State Route 116 and Highway 12. So from Petaluma, it would go on Lakeville Highway to Stage Gulch Road, and requiring that road, some of that roadway to be expanded to handle the additional capacity, Stage Gulch to Adobe to towards Arnold Drive, and then Highway 12 all the way over to Cordelia. So this roadway, unlike some of the other alignments I showed you before, this is already there, but the concept would be to expand it a bit to handle additional capacity. So, and the existing Highway 37 would be abandoned in that circumstance. So, okay, let's continue. Next slide, please. Okay, alignment 9, our final one here, is just a more direct crossing of the bay, similar to alignment 7 that I showed you a minute ago with that, without that southerly extension of SR 121. This would just be a simple, quote unquote, simple bay crossing from Novato to Mare Island, fairly direct. It would be a few miles shorter than than the current routing of State Route 37, but it was again on a new bay crossing. So, all right, next slide, please. So in addition to these different alignments, part of the screening process also looked at various transportation modal concepts. One thing that's not shown here that I do want to just couldn't help, we will emphasize it a few times here, is bicycle and pedestrian. So we showed you in the purpose and need statement a moment ago that that bicycle and pedestrian was very important to part of the purpose and need. And during the level 1 screening, Caltrans made it clear that any new facility it constructs would include safe bike and pedestrian facilities, whether on a attached lane or a separate route. So it wasn't really a differentiator anymore. So it was just accepted that any of the alternatives carried forward would include bike and ped facilities. But in terms of some other modes that were on the table, one was a floating bridge. This is a picture of, I believe it's in Lake Washington, interstate, I think it's Interstate 520, and connecting, I believe, Bellevue to Seattle. And this bridge does float, so given our bay environment here, there was some consideration of something like this that could be, again, resilient to changing water levels if the bridge floats. That is something that adjusts. So another concept that was considered was ferry service, and given that there is some ferry service serving some parts of the study area, like Vallejo has an established terminal. Larkspur, not far away, has one as well. So we got feedback at the very beginning that perhaps instead of looking at a roadway, we should just look at replacing Highway 37 with ferry service. So that was one option carried forward, looked at, I should say. Also not pictured here is rail. Smart Sonoma Marin Area Rapid Transit has been a active participant in this process from the beginning, and they have been doing some of their own planning here. We'll say more about rail as it goes forward here, but let's go to the next slide. Okay, so working with our stakeholder working group, our technical working groups, the PEL study team, it came up with some initial recommendations for the level 1 screening. And as I'll show you in a minute, went through those recommendations with the stakeholder working group and technical working group, and actually changed those recommendations as a result of the engagement with the participants. So the initial recommendation was to eliminate alignments 2, 3, and 8. 2 and 3 aren't shown here, but they would have gone cross-country from 101 over the Petaluma River. And 8 is shown here, as you'll see in the second. You see at the bottom here, it was actually carried forward. We'll say more about that in a minute. We made a recommendation that 5 and 6 were similar enough that we should just consider a simple one, single one, 5 and 6 together. And then the recommendation was to eliminate the floating bridge as a modal option because it would pose some difficult challenges, because this is a navigable channel. And if you have a floating bridge, that's usually quite low to the water. And you cannot really put boats underneath that. So the floating bridge option was eliminated very early on, recommended to be early on. Again, we did take these recommendations to our technical working group and stakeholder working groups. And the one big change from those initial recommendations listed at the top here was that alignment 8 was carried forward instead of eliminated. It had been recommended for elimination early on because it did not, it was very challenging in connecting community of Vallejo to the west. It would have definitely posed a challenge for travel from Vallejo to the west. So alignment 8 had been, again, proposed for elimination, but we decided based on the feedback from our technical working groups and stakeholder working group to carry it forward. And we'll have some more information to show about alignment 8 in our level 2 and 3 screening. So finally, yeah, we did carry forward the ferries, but as a supplemental option. So ferries, again, can be part of a overall transportation network. There's certainly potential to augment service, but ferries on their own just would not have the capacity to handle the volume of traffic that uses this corridor. And right now, you know, these trips on Highway 37 do go to pretty diffuse destinations, and just picking a single ferry terminal would have posed some transportation challenges. So we've thrown a lot on the table here. We're gonna, my colleague Jeff Berna is gonna go through our level 2 and 3 screening on how these alignments were further winnowed down and how we got to a single alternative to carry forward at the end. Jeff.
Great, yeah, thanks, John. And if anybody joined us late, I just want to do a recap of our process. Is that we're going to walk through the evaluation criteria. I'm going to speak to level 2 and level 3, and then turn it over to Tammy Massengale from Caltrans again to conclude, like, where are we going after the study? How can you get involved and such? So, again, if you want any chats, please put your comments in the chat. We are tracking them. We'll revisit them. We're going to open it up for Q&As here at the end. So we're about 2/3 through this presentation. So in the level 2 criteria value, the whole process is very similar to what John described for level 1. You know, we begin by actually developing the criteria. What are the questions that we need to ask to help evaluate the best alignments and alternatives? And again, this was developed in coordination with a lot of the stakeholders because many others have intimate knowledge of the resources and issues in the corridor. And you can see on this slide here, we're looking at traffic, design, environmental, and not only just because it helps to capture similar criteria, but we also had technical working groups assigned to like traffic issues. And we had traffic experts wrestle with what are the right questions and what should we evaluate? What can we count? Same thing with design. We pulled in design experts and environmental throughout the corridor. And then the last really feasibility is that, you know, some of the ideas and concepts were thrown out. Is it even feasible? And you can see from John's conversation that, you know, for example, the floating bridge has some feasibility concerns. So with each of these, we applied the criteria, and then we can look at like traffic, for example. We recognize that some of the alignments are different, right? We're looking at existing 37. Now we're looking at a whole new corridor. Well, what happens to all the travel patterns that everybody's following now and into the future? What about, are we going to increase or decrease the vehicle miles traveled, which is important for you users, but also because there's a correlation with greenhouse gas emissions associated with vehicle miles traveled. On the design side, we're looking at how do we maintain some of the connectivity that current SR 37 provides to businesses, homes, etc. And on the environmental side, again, working closely with our stakeholders, what are some of the environmental resources that can provide, it can be a constraint within some of these alignments, but also what are some opportunities to improve the environmental condition? And is that possible with some of these alignments? And then again, on the feasibility, is it even possible? Like looking at some of the cuts and fills. If we put a new alignment across the bay and it's on an embankment, which is fill material, do we have enough fill? What does that look like? Can we get enough in the Bay Area? And so these are the considerations we did in level 2. And then we applied that then on the next slide to those alternatives. Again, those alignments that John said we carried forward. So we applied those level 2 criteria to all these alignments. And then also based on feedback, we added an additional alignment. And on the next slide. So based on the feedback, we received some input. So for example, alignment 9 was that direct cross right across the bay. There's a lot of benefits to that, right? It's the shortest route, the time savings, travel time reliability, all that was, was great. But some of the downsides of that alignment was that what happens to the current access on 37? What about the connection to 121, which is very important for the regional travel patterns? And so, based on input, we said, well, why don't we combine the two? Let's look at the western portion of 37, maintain that connectivity 121, but also have that direct route across the bay. So we folded and created alignment 10, and we applied the criteria to all of these alternatives. And then based on, again, we applied, next slide, the criteria. These were the results. And so again, just a high level. If you are interested in looking at the PEL report when it's produced and consolidated, you can look at all the criteria we looked at. These are really just the high level points here. So based on the application of that criteria, we'd like to eliminate alternatives 1, 4, and 7. So again, 1 was following partially on the existing corridor, then over a new route. 4 is coming down from Petaluma, then went on that new route. And 7 was that one that went across the bay and it had that odd connection, right, to 121 straight up. And in addition to looking at all those alignments, we also were examining a 4-lane roadway and 6-lane roadway designs. And based on the traffic volumes and also in the recognition that we don't want to increase the VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, we also eliminated a 6-lane design option. So we did consider it, we saw the benefits of it, but we also saw the demerits, and it was eliminated. So based on the criteria that we had developed. So then what does that mean? So carrying forward, we want to carry forward alternatives 5 and 6, which again are the existing alignments, 8, which is to the north, 9 and 10, which is across the bay and then across the bay with the western portion. We also considered modal recommendations. So, already we see some chats, right, on what about bikes and peds, pedestrian accommodation. So Caltrans policy is to consider pedestrian and bike access and along particularly this facility. And so that is part of our design. We'll share you a typical section so you can see how that is considered. So bike and ped was always part of the conversation on all of these alignments. The same thing with rail. Now with rail, it's a little different that we're not looking to accommodate necessarily the rail with an existing right-of-way of all these facilities. That was a consideration, but more importantly, we're looking at not precluding, right? Not doing anything with our alignment that would preclude rail improvements in this corridor. And then on the design options, again, we considered 4 lanes and then a shoulder running lane. And what that really is that without adding a lot of width to the overall profile, is that you can utilize the outside shoulder. So if you're driving along on your right side, that's, usually we think of breaking down and such, right? That right shoulder. If you make it just a little bit wider, you can actually use it as a travel lane, but during peak periods. So, when you're really congested, you can open up that shoulder lane and you can control who uses it. It could be just buses. It could be buses and HOV lane, right? So to get more people in vehicles and encourage ride shares and such. So that's how we really accommodate some of the transit, like the buses and such, and improving the travel time reliability through the corridor. Again, without adding 6 lanes, right? Without making this wide facility, utilize those shoulders. We also considered causeway and embankment design options. Now, a causeway, think of it as like a structure, right? It's like a bridge. It's like a long structure that the bridge just keeps going and going on, right? It's to elevate the roadway out of the inundation area. So that's the purpose of it. It's the causeway is basically a long structure. Embankment is where you will build up the roadway, but you put it on fill. And in some of the areas, we'll show you later, some of the areas that we have identified for embankment. In some cases, it's embankment. In other cases, it's just at grade, because we do have portions of the corridor that's in upland settings that the roadway would be at normal grade. So that's we're all carrying all those forward in our study. And then we're also going to carry forward the ferries, which John mentioned previously. All right, next slide. So that led us down to level 3. So we got through 1, 2, and 3, right? We went from 9, we added some alignments, and we reduced them. And so now we're looking at 4 of alignments or alternatives now, and we applied 43 screening criteria. And then these criteria follow the same thing we had before as far as the traffic, environmental, and we combined some of them. And at the level 3, we also added additional design details. Initially, we were working off the alignments as they were identified in prior studies. But by the time we got to this point, we applied our design standard. Like John mentioned with the northern route, right? There's a following existing 116 and 12. Well, that would not meet the design standards that we're designing to here in anticipation. And so there would be a lot of areas that would require additional rework along that alignment. And so we'll go look at it next slide, is that so these are the alternatives again, they're carried forward in level 3. And we felt pretty good about having this range, right? So we're looking at a totally uplands facility to the north. There still be some sections that would have to be on causeway because the inundation does make its way up that far north. And then you also have flooding issues. And then you can see we're carrying existing 37 as alternative 5. And then again, 9 and 10 we evaluated. And so based on when we applied the criteria on the next slide, we get into, here are the results. And based on the application of the criteria, we're not recommending for further evaluation the following 3 alternatives. Now, alternative 8, we feel that, as you can see, that if we were to build alternative 8, another underlying assumption is that the existing 37 is abandoned. So think of some of your travel patterns, right? From Vallejo to Novato now, you're going to have to go north, west, and then south, right? So there's a lot of this outer directional traffic, and that's that travel pattern. It's a disruption of some of the normal patterns that we see, both for commuters, locals, through traffic, freight, etc. And also because of the application of that design standard that I mentioned, there's considerable impacts. Because of the undulating, right, the terrain would require lots of cuts. So you're familiar with driving down the road and you see these large road cuts. There'd be a substantial number of those road cuts and other areas that would need to be filled. And then that leads to additional disruption to a lot of the connectivity for habitats and other species that are in uplands. When it came to alternative 9, now again, alternative 9 just goes straight across the bay. It has its own impacts. The bay is very sensitive. It's a very dynamic environment. And particularly if this were to be an embankment, that certainly would be problematic. And even on a causeway, there are still environmental issues and impacts associated with it. But it also does not have that link to 121 that was identified as being very important, again, for the travel patterns in the area, as well as does not provide access to existing facilities, properties on 37, as well as some of the key connections to like Atherton, Lakeville, and 121. Now, alternative 10 then also was supposed to address some of it, but you can see that it only addresses some of the access issues on the western portion. And in essence, we feel that alternative 5 accomplishes what 9 or 10, let's say 10 can do with less impacts and still maintain a lot of that access and such. So for 10, it had a lot of benefits to it, right? Provided a lot of good benefits, but it also had considerable more cost impacts as well. And so based on our level 3 screening then, we arrived at a recommendation. So based on that, Caltrans' recommendation then to move forward, which means to move out of the PEL study now, is that we've gone from all these alternatives and all these other considerations. And I know we've seen some chat, people are asking about impacts from some of those alternatives. At this point, we are now focused on alternative 5. And we say alternative 5, it really is a corridor. We don't have a specific, pen to paper on specific alignment as far as impacts. So we'll leave it there. So it utilizes the existing corridor. So that's one of its chief benefits from an impact point of view. but also think of, again, all the access that currently comes off of 37. If we had a lot of those alternatives, a lot of these properties would have no access whatsoever. Based on our work with the environmental groups, we recognize the benefit of an alternative 5 corridor built on a causeway. And again, the causeway meaning that it's an elevated structure. And what that allows is for some of the natural landward marsh migration, tidal migration, because not only is the sea going to rise, right, but every time it's rising, it's going to change that transition zone. And basically you're going to see it's going to move over time. And right now, 37 is an impediment to some of those natural hydrological connections and such. And so by removing the existing facility and the fill associated with it, putting the alignment up on a causeway allows us to not only address the sea level rise, but actually have considerable improvements to the natural hydrology and natural functions to occur. And so that's why we're really excited about this, this alternative in alignment. Next slide. So what is this going to look like? Right. So this is what we're moving forward, and it'd be, studied further in greater detail. But it consists of an expressway design. It'll have 2 travel lanes in each direction. And then it will also have that shoulder running lane. And then again, I mentioned the shoulder running lane. The intent there is really to be during peak periods, right? That's the periods that are heaviest congestion. We're looking at a 60-mile-an-hour posted speed limit. And there's other factors, right? Because that helps establish your design standards, like your curves and your grades, etc. So it's important to establish that. And then also we considered bike and pedestrian accommodation. Now what that means, and when we say accommodation, you'll see a graphic here shortly, is that we recognize that for some stretches, bike and pedestrian facility can be associated right on the causeway. In some cases, that's not ideal from a safety point of view, or just from aesthetics. Users don't want to be that close sometimes to that traveling speed for high vehicles. So we recognize that some areas, a bike pad facility may actually be connected, like it's on the side of the causeway or hanging off of it, or a separate adjacent, or in some cases where we are in upland situations, that you can meander through the existing right of way and not be as close to the existing facility itself and the traveling vehicles. We are looking at primarily a causeway, and that was a key comment from a lot of our stakeholders, the importance of putting it on a causeway and allowing for that, the natural hydraulic connections. But there will be some limited areas for embankment. And what that allows is then for that removal of the existing SR37 fill. The expressway design allows more flexibility to not only look at interchange locations, but actual intersections and also limited direct access, because again, there are many properties on here that some will be inundated and we don't need access, others are going to remain over through time, and we have to maintain the access. And then again, there's an opportunity for rail to be adjacent, like in the western portion. Right now, 37 and the Smart Line are adjacent. And so by going with alternative 5, it allows that relationship. Now we'll have to do further studies to see what that relationship will look like, whether or not they will go up on a causeway like us or not. That's to be decided. But we are not precluding that opportunity by the rail. And then next slide gives you a typical section. So this is the visual graphic to show what we are designing for. So you have the inside shoulder, right? And it's 10 feet, especially if you're on a causeway, you have to allow that space. It's there an incidence and then you have 2 travel lanes. And then on the right side, we'll just follow tracking here. It says shoulder or an optional shoulder running lane. And that's what I said, it's at 12 feet. So it allows you to use it as an actual travel lane during that peak period. And conceptually, we're just showing the bike pedestrian facility associated in this section of the causeway on the actual causeway. But again, it may be hanging off, it may in some cases be meandering off the pavement, but within the right of way. So that's what we're looking at. And again, you can see the structures that it allows for that hydrologic connectivity because you're really on a pierced system. And then the final slide that I'll be discussing before I hand off to Tammy is I want to give you a kind of a overview then. If you look from the west to the east, and I'll give you the stars indicate where there are current interchanges or intersections that need to be improved or considered, right, in the future development of this corridor. The blue indicates portions of the alignment that we foresee would be on a causeway, again, on a structure that's elevated out of the sea level rise. Green indicates portions that will be either on embankment, again, that's that fill, or just at grade. And like a Black Point, right, they'll likely be at grade, and then it's your point as well. So, and then you track, there's a long stretch of blue causeway. And some of the challenges that we'll be working on in the future is how do we maintain access to some of those, you see those red dots, those are some of the larger intersections. How do we maintain that? And then again, there's an interchanges as you get further to the east in Vallejo. And so that is what we're looking at. And we're excited about it, I believe, right, Tammy? And at this point, I will turn it over to her. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jeff. As you can see, our team has been hard at work analyzing all of these different alternatives for the PEL study. And as we mentioned at the outset of the meeting, we undertook the study to bridge the gap that takes place in the project delivery process between planning and environmental review and realize some efficiencies and benefits. Our work to date has already seen the benefits of conducting a PEL study. Some of the key benefits that we've realized are from examining the environmental and community values throughout the process. This included involving agencies and others as partners, identifying both concerns as well as opportunities for collaboration. The process allowed for broad participation by stakeholders to help shape the transportation solutions for the corridor. We've worked with many stakeholders to evaluate the alternatives that led us to this preferred alternative. Another benefit is the enhanced and early coordination with resource agencies and the public that has helped us preliminarily design a transportation project that we expect to serve the community's transportation needs more effectively. The PEL study and its many supporting studies will provide agencies with tools to design better projects while avoiding and minimizing the impacts on the communities and the natural resources. The process has helped to build better interagency relationships and will also help to resolve key differences on issues moving forward from planning through design and ultimately project implementation. We've met regularly and closely with transportation agencies in the region as well as resource agencies. This collaboration has been helpful to identify and work to resolve key issues. A final benefit of this study is to improve the project delivery timeframes by minimizing duplication of planning and other environmental compliance processes, thus creating one cohesive flow of information. Next slide, please. Throughout the development of the PEL study, we have sought feedback through meetings, surveys, and various working groups. The alternative we are recommending to be carried forward as an ultimate solution for the State Route 37 is the result of input from many stakeholders and members of the public. When the PEL study is complete, public involvement will continue, and we will look for your involvement through other phases of project development, including the environmental reviews, design, and construction. You will continue to have an opportunity to provide input on the subsequent projects. Tonight, we would like to hear from you about your thoughts on the preferred alternative. Next slide, please. Now we'll go over the comments and questions that you've put in the chat and then hear directly from you on your comments and thoughts on what we've presented this evening. And you can do that again by raising your hand, which John will talk about in just a moment. I'm going to turn the meeting back over to John, and he's going to facilitate our question and answer component. John, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Tammy. And I'd like to just start by, there have been a number of comments in the chat. I'd like to just digest a few of those. A number of comments in the chat were also addressed throughout the presentation. I won't spend time on those. So, but I would like to just start with a number of questions and comments that some of these appeared as a theme here. So there were a few questions about the number of lanes that would be in each alternative, and the number, how this could affect potential VMT, how the Sears Point to Mare Island project, one of the so-called interim projects is increasing the lanes. So I wanted to just try to address a few of those here and invite fellow panelists to talk about that. So first, VMT was definitely a very important consideration in the alternative screening, as Jeff mentioned, in both level 2 and level 3. Alternatives were set aside because they were inducing VMT. They carried forward because they were not inducing VMT. So that was a very key consideration. There was a comment about the Sears Point to Mare Island project, again, increasing VMT, and that is, I think Ricky or Chris or Tammy can speak to that. I believe that that environmental document does include mitigation for that. So, so that is again a near-term project versus the PEL. The PEL is looking at a very long-term solution here. So, Ricky or someone else who'd like to follow up on that, please go ahead.
Thanks, John. For Sears Point to Mare Island improvement project, currently the team have tolling as a strategy and also other travel demand strategies. The purpose and the goal is to keep the vehicle mile traveled no increase. That's the purpose. So hopefully that will be released in the final environmental document. But if there is any VMT increase, the project will provide mitigation strategies. So that's a plan. Hope that answers the question.
And I just want to acknowledge, I see some hands raised. We will get to those in just a few minutes in the order that they came up here. I will just sort of continue going through a few of the comments that are in the chat, and then we'll go to the raised hands here. So there were questions about the costs of the project and would tolling be used. And I think Jeff covered that cost was definitely something that was considered as part of the screening, and alternative 5 fared fairly well in that regard. Tolling, there is state legislation that designates this as a toll corridor. That Caltrans is not a tolling agency. Caltrans builds and operates the roads, does not toll them. That is handled by another regional agency, the Bay Area Tolling Authority, which is a part of MTC. I don't know if anyone else from Caltrans would like to follow up on that, but that's
so
yeah.
I can add to that, John. Mm-hmm. So for the previously the team was looking for the legislation through the Senate, but that legislation didn't go through. So the Sears Point to Mare Island project will try to go through the tolling authority through the through CTC. So that's a plan, and we'll hear more news in the next few months. And also, I want to add that it's through the BEFA and not from BETA. Just want to.
Oh, sorry.
That.
Thank you for setting me straight on that. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
We did have some comments about cost from another angle. Time. The comment noted that most commuters on this corridor are lower income people who work in Marin. And definitely that was a very big consideration as part of the level 3 screening. We looked at what had been designated as equity priority communities, where there are a certain number of indicators where the community is lower income or otherwise facing some challenges. And alternative 5 that we're seeing here was really the best performing in terms of addressing the issues unique to providing access to equity priority communities in the region here. So We had a couple of questions about earthquakes, which is very timely, considering what's been going on the last couple of days here. All of the alignments do go through, they are very long corridors. They go across Rogers Creek Fault Zone and others. And Ricky, Chris, Tammy, I don't know if you can speak more eloquently to the geotechnical seismic considerations that will be taken into account in constructing any new roadway here. Certainly imagine it would be built to pretty rigorous standards.
Yeah, good point, John. It will be. We have very strict technical standards for seismic that all of our structures in the Bay Area go through. Then this one would also go through a similar review.
We had a question about would sound barriers be required, and yes, in some cases there were some. It was indicated that there would be the potential for sound levels to increase, and that some type of mitigation, such as barriers, may be needed. All of them needed some in some locations, but Alternative 5 already is an existing travel corridor. Building the causeway in this area, it is sort of the least populated, especially through the central section. Obviously, different story in Vallejo. But it is there is an existing roadway corridor there, and noise mitigation will certainly be a part of the future environmental study carried forward here. But in terms of differentiating between alignments, noise, Alternative 5 fared fairly well in terms of noise. So I think those are the key questions from the chat that weren't otherwise addressed. I will move now to the I see some raised hands, and what we will do, I've got a few names here: Craig Yates, Robert Brecky, Danny T. In just a moment, I'll go in that order. I will ask you to unmute, and we'll ask you to take yourself off mute, and please give us your question, comment for the group, and we'll answer it as best as we can. So we'll start with Craig, and again, Robert Brecky on deck. So,
yes, a couple of questions. One is, will this be elevated causeway? I call it a skyway. Will this be prefabricated? And second, there's no real need for tolls because there's adequate funds coming in from all the different resources we have presently to take care of this roadway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the first question on elevation and then tolls, who would like to take those?
I can start, and then Ricky or Chris, you guys can jump in and add anything, please. It will be an elevated structure. We're looking at 30-ish feet for it right now. That will be further determined as it's refined in environmental and design. As for tolls, there will be some type of funding mechanism that is necessary for this project. If you haven't heard, we've done some very rough estimates, and we're looking in excess of $8 billion to build this. No one has that kind of money laying around, if you will, and so we are working with the transportation agencies and MTC to set up funding. But one of the ways to fund a structure is through tolling. So Ricky, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Tammy, and thanks for the question. Yes, for the tolling also, not only it provides additional funding opportunities, also it can serve as a ways to reduce the vehicle mile travel. I just want to add that.
And Ricky or Tammy, the question about prefabricated, I think that might be premature at this point. Anyone want to weigh in on that?
So we'll conduct more rigorous studies during the environmental phase and also in the design phase for the exact constructability and how to construct the causeway. So it's we don't have an answer at this point, but we'll analyze it in the future phases. And John, I think you are muted.
Sorry, yes, Robert Brecky next, and then Danny T. So Robert Brecky, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, just barely. If you could speak up a little bit, I think that would be helpful.
Can you hear me?
That's better.
So a number of things I asked in the chat something about the question of tunneling. I know it's very expensive, but was there any consideration given to that?
Mm-hmm.
And then number 2 in the chat was, is there any consideration of phasing as to alleviate capacities, sooner? In other words, if you did the first stage of the 2 stages of the raised situation, some of it you probably would do in concert with one another, but could that be consideration?
Mm-hmm.
Most importantly, I didn't write down, and I have spoken about before, is that the aspect of the toll. If you are aware, I'm sure, that to get to San Francisco, one can choose to either go by way of the ferry or to take the bridges to get there, in which case at this present time, you're paying $14 for that trip. And in future times, that will be up to about $20, I believe. My daughter was recently working just across the water. My wife is in special education, making very little money in a very taxing work. And she's across in Pleasant Hill. And so at various points, we paid from $14 on a regular basis and $28 on certain occasions, as in regards to my work, which travels sometimes. And most importantly, not just about my life, but about the lives of people in Vallejo who are living in Vallejo because they are probably the most unfortunate of the Bay Area in terms of they're living here because they sacrifice not the best of education, they sacrifice paying tolls, and housing is, there's less quality of life here at this time, and we pay heavily on all these things. And I don't think there's consideration of that.
Thank you.
Granted that you are probably, because our own Senator Dodd, who recommended this and worked with Caltrans and everyone else to promote the bill to do this, promoted the idea of tolls. And I took issue with him. But that aside, how are you going to deal with the person that goes over to Highway 21 and makes a right turn? How are you going to make it from the person from Vallejo's side? How are you going to make it from the person from 101 side? And how are you going to make it for the person that's going across the whole thing?
Okay.
And which in which direction? Anyway,
okay. I think we got you. I think we understand your concern about the toll, and so we heard about tunneling, phasing, and tolling, and equity concerns there. So tunneling, Jeff, I'd like to quarterback that first one to you, and then
I'll do the tolling,
phasing and tolling,
and I can jump on the equity priority communities as well. So yeah, regarding the tolling, the tunneling, we did look at tunneling. We looked at other local examples, worldwide examples, different types of tunneling. And the bottom line is two things. One, it is very expensive. And there's a lot of unpredictable, unknown conditions that really elevate the costs. And we also had the alignment 9, if you recall, we went straight across on a causeway. So from a functionality and a benefit point of view, they're very similar. But the causeway design was far cheaper and achieved the same thing. So we eliminated tunneling early in the process based on those factors. And in regards to the consideration of folks living in Vallejo and traveling either across the 121 or all the way over to Novato and other points in Marin County. That I must say was a very critical consideration from day one. It is part of that purpose and need that Tammy, we walked through early in the presentation, and Jonathan, you covered that. So it made it into our purpose of our project. And so we considered, so equitable priority communities are those communities that are identified as possibly being challenged with transit, low income, and other challenges that we considered. And so why we feel this alignment is very appropriate is that it serves the Vallejo directly, right? We recognize, remember we talked about some of the out of directional travel that you would have to do in some of the other alignments. Well, this is the most direct route. It does also, our design allows or accommodates that transit consideration. So if transit is important for the community, it not only, we serve it on the corridor, but it directly feeds into Vallejo and then feeds on the western portion right into Nevada. So again, I just want to say that it was considered throughout from purpose and need through level 1, 2, and 3. And I'll turn the rest over to Ricky.
Yeah, Ricky or Tammy, could you address the phasing question or any other part of that you'd like?
I'll add more to the tolling. So for the MTC's Sears Point to Mare Island improvement project, the tolling does include the equity option to provide a discount to communities and individuals who fits into the qualified criteria. And so I just want to add that.
And Tammy, did you want to get in there too?
Yeah, I did have a couple of comments. Thank you so much for your comments. There's a lot to unpack, so hopefully I can catch some of the items that we haven't talked about. Staging definitely will play a part in the construction of this entire roadway. So I think I answered that. I did want to also add a little bit on the tolling, and the two of our transportation agencies, the Solano Transportation Agency and the Marin Transportation Agency, along with input from Napa Valley, they are working on some commuter bus strategies, and it's very much in the infancy right now, but we want to have other modes of transportation for folks to use that go from either Vallejo over to the Novato area or vice versa. And we do understand that there are many people that their occupations, livelihood do not allow them to take a bus. And so that's where those priced tolling would take place. And then I don't know that we addressed the question about what's going to happen at like 121 and 101. There will be interchanges at these yellow stars, the interchange improvements that you see on the map. So there will be, we're not proposing any kind of like stoplights or signals. There will be interchanges instead. So I hope I answered all of those questions that were not answered by the other folks.
Great, thanks, Tammy. So next we have Danny T, then Sandra Donnell and David Cates. So Danny T, what's your question or comment, please?
SAR 87 called the Donna.
Okay, we're gonna move on to Sandra Donnell. Sandra, please go ahead.
It's Donnell.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Curious how I grew up in this area and have lived here for 71 years. And I'm just curious how high a priority this is for you at Caltrans and all.
Great, thank you. Tammy, Chris, Ricky, would you like to?
Sure, John. I think for me, the simple answer is sea level rise, right? We have a very clear bookend on the end of this. Sea level is rising, and we have a very limited amount of time to build this structure and a lot of work to do to get there. And so that's the urgency that's driving us to get there in very short order. Do something like this is, as you can imagine, a very large and complex process. Right now, we sort of envision this taking 20 years to get this thing entirely built. Of course, I will say, there are a lot of unknowns right now. We don't have funding identified or secured, but none of that's going to stop the sea level from rising. So that's really one of the main drivers for us.
Okay.
And thank you, Chris. And I just want to add also, it's very high priority for Caltrans as well as our partner agencies. As you can see on the screen and upper left corner, and it's across Marine, Sonoma, Napa, and Sonano, as well as MTC. So, and Caltrans, we formed a Resilient 37 team to address the sea level rise and all other issues on 37. So it's a priority for all of us.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll next go to David Cates and then I'm going to mispronounce, I'm sure, Heiserman or Hiserman. So David Cates, please go ahead.
Okay, I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so my interest, I live right near 37 on the Vallejo side. And currently I was the one that asked the question about the sound barriers because it's quite loud in my backyard. And I was wondering what you're going to do with the Napa River Bridge. You have Causeway in blue throughout that sort of water crossing, but what's happening with that because it's only 2 lanes currently?
That would be that's a good question. Ricky or Jeff, would you, I believe that would be.
Yeah, from a design perspective, yeah, thanks, Dave, for the question. It would be a 4-lane facility, again, with those wide shoulders for peak period use. We did indicate it as Causeway, which is in its structure. So for our major crossings, it would not, like Causeway is just enough to get it out of the sea level rise. But as Tammy mentioned, it's not just the sea level rise, there's additional consideration for freeboard, which is that space between the water right in the underside of your structure. We considered wave wash and so it's kind of an additive. And so really a lot of the causeway is going to be nearly 30 feet up from what you would see today. But then over those crossings, they're navigational waters. And so we have to make sure we have a structure that has the clearance to allow for whatever that necessary navigation is what was required. And so I think specifically for your point, there would be a bridge over the major crossing there. And then as far as sound barriers, that's a design detail that we did not evaluate in detail because again, we don't know whether biped is going to be on the structures at that location. Are there receptors, noise receptors that we would have to be evaluated? Certainly that's part of a future environmental analysis would look at what are the noise impacts to the receptors and then look at ways to abate it, right? Whether it be a wall or other measures.
So just to summarize, there will still be a bridge over the Napa River that'll allow maritime traffic underneath. Is that correct?
Correct. Absolutely. You just said it more succinctly. Mm-hmm.
And you're going to look at sound barriers that will mitigate the noise with 60-mile-an-hour traffic. Is that correct?
That is correct. In future analysis, again, we've taken this far, but we go through your typical CEQA NEPA analysis. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think.
Thanks, David.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to move on to M. Heiserman. Heiserman, please go ahead. Here we go. Let's see. Not able to ask Hiserman to unmute apparently here. I apologize for that. I don't know if any other panelists can intervene there, but for some reason it's not unmuting.
It's not working for me either, John.
Okay. Hiserman, I'm so sorry. I don't know what is going on here. We'll keep trying. We do see your hand up. I'm sorry that for some reason it's not working. I will just shift for a moment to some of the other comments that have come in the chat.
John, I'm sorry, if they can't, they can always just put it in the chat too.
And yes, thank you. Yes, so we'll work on it. But in the meantime, if you'd like to put your question or comment in the chat, we'll try to get to it that way. And I will jump it to try to digest some of the other comments that have come in. There has been quite a spirited discussion about tolls along the discussion that was going on before. Some concern about it for sure, similar to what Mr. Brecky had noted, and then also some observers noting that tolling would help fund transit and potentially also help reduce VMT. So those are a couple, that discussion is going on here. Another, let's see. Let's see. I think let's see. Question about how properties on 37 would be accessed from high up on a causeway. That's actually been something we've been talking about as a group here. Would anyone from the group like to jump in on that one? Property access, I think, is definitely something that bears a lot more discussion. There's also the question of the inundation that's coming, and access there may be some properties that will be underwater here soon. So Tammy, I see you on there. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, John, you addressed what I was going to say. Right now, we would look to provide access, some type of temporary access. We're not going to landlock anyone, but it is very important to remember that a fair amount of this area is going to be inundated with sea level rise, upwards 9 of 10 feet. So many of those areas that are there now may not be there in the future to have access. And that's something that we will work with the property owners and others as we move through the environmental phase.
Another question's come up about whether other Bay Area roadways are going to be impacted by sea level rise, and has there been some prioritization of resources and time on roadways that are going to be inundated by sea level rise. I'm no doubt others will be affected, but this one is pretty unique in that there is no nearby alternative, and the inundation is pretty swift and extensive throughout the corridor. Chris, Tammy, Ricky, I don't know if you can speak to any other regional studies and other Caltrans efforts that might be relevant here.
Yeah, John, Caltrans, along with all of our local partner agencies and the general public, quite frankly, are very concerned about sea level rise and the effects sea level rise is going to have in our lives. At Caltrans, we've been actively engaged in studying sea level rise and studying the effects of sea level rise on our infrastructure and our facilities for years now. We have a number of projects throughout the 9 county Bay Area, District 4, They're a great concern, but projects that are in our process and all stages of our process, and many or most of these projects, are planning to address sea level rise in some fashion or another. This is, like John mentioned, a very high profile, for obvious reasons, project, but many of our projects from now and through the coming years are going to be absolutely addressing a lot of complications that we're going to begin to see from sea level rise.
Okay, in terms of new hands here, I still am unable to unmute M. Hiserman. I do not know what is going on. So, and I have not seen any question in the chat. So,
and John, I can add to the previous questions.
Thanks.
So for the question about the staging of the alignment 5, the chosen alignment for the ultimate project, the construction staging is highly dependent on the funding. As Tammy mentioned earlier, the project could cost more than $8 billion, and that funding will not likely come in once. So the staging will be phased and depend on the funding availability, and will construct portions of the facings, and then involve building the viaduct and then switch the traffic, and then remove the existing as the sea level rise and the inundation in progress. And also, as far as the Napa River Bridge, we'll evaluate the vertical clearances and the structure feasibility of the widening the existing structure or build a new structure. Just want to add that.
And then another question has come in: would all lanes be tolled, or would tolling follow the express lane model? This would be similar to a bridge toll. So here, I believe that's what has been envisioned. It would not be an express lane model for this corridor. And yeah, there are other questions about where tolling would be used elsewhere in the Bay Area. We're not really focusing on that so much tonight, but if any of the panelists would like to speak to that, tolling elsewhere.
The tolling options are still being explored, and at this point, just want to add that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks.
I do have I'm going to try, we do have one new hand, Bruce Ole Olson. I will try to see if I can unmute you. And let's see, can you go ahead, Bruce Olson?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, what's your question or comment, please?
Okay, my comment is, what I'm hearing you say is that no comprehensive study of Caltrans facilities being flooded or inundated or influenced by sea level rise has been done. And you're also saying that we are first in line, so we're going to move forward. Could you comment on my comment, please?
Thank you. Let's see. Lot to go for there. Ricky, would you like to go first, and Chris?
Sure. And thanks for this question. So we have a few other projects on the corridor. We call them interim projects. And for example, the project in Marin County, and the interim flood reduction project, it's also currently in the environmental phase, and that project will most likely be constructed first, and before the rest of the corridor constructed the ultimate project. Also, there are other projects subject to flooding is also being studied outside of State Route 37.
Great. I don't see any other new hands up here, so I think maybe we should go forward with the rest of the presentation.
Great, thank you so much, John. Really appreciate everybody's comments and your input. We understand that you all are super busy and that your time is very valuable. So we really appreciate you joining us tonight. And we hope that you will take time to send us any additional comments via the email, which you see here on your screen, voicemail, or our web map. And for our one participant, M. Heiserman, that wasn't able to chat with us, or we weren't able to unmute you, I apologize for that, but you can contact us either by calling us at the number listed or emailing us. And then if you are interested in the visualization that we showed earlier, you can scan this QR code on your phone right now, and it is super easy to navigate it on your mobile device. And you can move around and pan that area. If you go to our map page, we also have other locations that you can look at these 360 visualizations. And lastly, since we have a good audience, we've had a lot of participation, so thank you all. We wanted to give you a heads up about a different public meeting that's going to be taking place in October. That meeting will be for the North Bay Baylands Regional Conservation Investment Strategy, also known as the RCIS. That meeting will be held on Wednesday, October 19th from 5:30 to 6:30. And for further information on that meeting, you can visit baylandsrcis.org. And with that, I want to wish you all a happy evening and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here and providing your great comments. So thank you all so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Before we all leave, I just want to add to earlier Mr. Olsen's question. Caltrans also have varieties of projects to address the sea level rise and the climate change, including the Sonoma Route 1 Gleason Beach realignment project and many others. All right, thanks everyone.